going on from that, alien abductions, which link it. What have you found with that? Because there's seem to be different aspects of how these abductions are being played out. Whether they are as black and white, as physical as they are, or are they interdimensional? Are they something? You know what?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a hugely complicated issue, and I felt that it's a bit like you get with the alien abductions, you get into the same issue as the whole issue of flying saucers and alien craft. Oh yes, it's a military craft. No, it isn't. It's an alien craft. Alien abductions. Oh yes, it's aliens. Coming from another planet to extract eggs and get genetic material. No, it's not. It's a military program. That's some kind of mind control program. And in this particular case, I think there's some of both going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think there are alien flying saucers that come from other planets, physical metallic craft. Same with abductions. And I think the Travis Walton case, for example, which I think we talked about before, if you read his case where he was just, seemed to have got injured by the extended field of a flying saucer.
Actually, he believes now that he died, didn't he? And they took him in the...
Yeah.
And that's why he was going to...
Has he actually said that? Has he actually said he thinks he died? I'm not sure if he said that. I know he...
Right, okay, I thought that he...
I don't think he said he actually felt he died.
I was talking to somebody at Holmfirth, and they were telling me that he'd come to the conclusion that he wasn't supposed to be there.
He definitely said that.
And they took him... Well, I'd made up that he died, but he was seriously injured. And
that's what they were helping him. I think that's
because he'd never had anything before. He's never had anything since. And I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Absolutely. And in response to the Richards program, I was sent this thing about it's not really an abduction case. There was hints of an abduction might happen possibly, but if it did, it was probably very short. But there was this landing in 1966 at Westhall, which is a suburb of Melbourne. It was about half a mile from a school, and the kids all ran out to see this flying saucer landing. And I don't think any beings were seen then on that particular instance. And that account I only learned of literally in the last couple of days. I'd never heard of this, and it's one of these things that people say, oh, why don't these flying saucers land in the middle of a city?
You put it up on you check the evidence.
I did. They just literally yesterday or the day before. And people say, well, sorry, but your problem is you don't know the material. And as I didn't know that particular story until the other day. Yes, it was a flying saucer, that's what they all described. Yes, it was described as landing. Multiple witnesses, school children, a teacher, one of the teachers at least saw it. Other witnesses in the area saw it land. The grass was seen. Military people came in. They were there 30 minutes afterwards. That really did happen, folks. Get used to the idea. So yes, that was a physical landing, and that reminded me of the one in Zimbabwe. Have you heard about that one that happened? 1994, the one that John Mack went to investigate. A school in Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe. And that was witnessed, I think, by about 20 or 30 school children. I don't think any of the staff saw it, but they certainly, got the kids.
The kids swear now, don't they?
Oh yeah. And that was that. And actually, in that case, the thing landed, and beings got out. People actually got out, and they were walking around, and they telepathically communicated, according to one of the children.
We saw something silver, and then we quickly ran to the logs, and we saw a silver thing, and we saw a man standing next to it.
What did it feel like when he was looking at you?
I felt scared.
It felt scared? What was scary about it?
Well, I felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before.
Did you see the eyes? What did they look like?
They were going like that.
Did you look at him?
Yes.
Did he look at you?
Yes, then he gave me the creeps, and I took it.
Gave you the creeps. Actually, in your drawing, you showed him standing up, didn't you?
Yes, I had to draw him standing up because I couldn't draw him sitting. What I thought was maybe the world's going to end. Maybe they're telling us the world's going to end.
So, it appears that to me, we mentioned abductions there particularly, but what I'm saying is, yes, those stories appear to show that physical metallic craft landed on the ground, and at least in one of those cases a being got out and did something. And going back more to the abduction type stories and alien contact stories, what everyone I think will agree if they read the literature is that the stories changed in the early 60s. And in the 50s we had, as I said, the thing with Richard, we had the George Adamskis, the George Van Tassel, George King, Dr. George King, who then founded the Etheria Society, claiming to have met beings, communicated with them telepathically. Adamski is said to have gone in the craft, I think once or twice, maybe 3 times. Howard Menger, I mentioned his case in the book as well. Very interesting case, because it wasn't just him. I don't think Adamski had any other witnesses apart from him. He might have had 1 or 2 witnesses on the ground. But Howard Menger had people that came to his house, and he said, they're going to come tonight, come up to my house, have a coffee, and we'll wait for them to come. And they came, and they went, and they saw them, and they saw these orbs in the woods and stuff. And there was, I think, several witnesses to Menger's craft, which looked like the Adamski craft. And I had people contacting me because on the cover of that book, I've got a 3D model that Peter Lomas kindly drew for me in Blender, or made for me in Blender, of the Adamski craft, and people were just contacting me saying, "Oh, that Adamski case was fake," and that's in the book. I've put the Adamski case in the book. The book is free. Please read it. Was the Adamski case really fake? Well, I'm not so confident of pronouncing it as a total fake. If you read what's in the book and read the links that I've given, I think there seems to be some evidence that some of what Adamski said, what he witnessed, did actually happen. I wouldn't give the same credence to his case as, say, Travis Walton's, but I certainly wouldn't totally dismiss it, particularly when we have Howard Menger reporting the same sort of craft, and there's been several reports of craft. I think, in fact, Scott Felton messaged on my Facebook thing in response to the story we were just talking about. He said that Margaret Fry witnessed an Adamski type craft in 1955 in Britain. It landed in Bexley Heath. I've never heard of that. So that's another apparently corroboration. I don't think she would she'd never heard of flying saucers at the time. Margaret Fry investigated the Berwyn Mountain case that Richard Hall made a film about. So we had all the Space Brothers cases: Menger, George Van Tassel, King, Adamski. I think there are a few others that I haven't mentioned.
There's the Bob Jacobs one, of course, isn't there? The Bob Jacobs 64, wasn't it?
Yeah, but his was just the filming of the missile.
The missiles.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that might have been an Adamski type crash, though. I think they had quite a far off view of it on the film.
He just said it was a disco, didn't he?
Yeah, he just said it was a double lenticular shape. Yeah, that's right.
Knocked off the nuclear head, didn't it?
That's right. I don't know if that was, and that was a bit later. That was in the 60s.
60s, yeah.
But going to 61, of course, we've got the Betty and Barney Hill case. Did we talk about that last time?
We didn't, no.
Right. So the Betty and Barney Hill case, again, I was fairly familiar with the overview of that. And I was just kind of having a little bit of an argument about this with somebody on Facebook last night, or details about that case. Because what the Betty and Barney Hill case was, when that came out, things seemed to change. All the Space Brothers stories kind of seemed to stop. Yeah. We didn't get the Adamski, we're here to help you, go into a higher realm and this sort of thing. We're here to bring peace. That kind of stopped, and the Hills were taken against their will.
Abduction.
Yeah, that was a classic abduction, put onto a bed of sorts. They were, had things stuck in them, possibly an implant. Barney described, he had, when he got back after it, the memories were, they knew something had happened, but they didn't know what. Traces on the car. They had some specks of paint on the car or something. The bonnet was, or the trunk, the boot cover was magnetised. They had a compass, and somebody actually sent me another interesting thing saying that they feel the Air Force might have been somehow involved in this case or had knowledge of it, because they told the Hills, somebody told the Hills, somebody at the Air Force told Betty Hill's sister to check the boot of the car with a compass to check for being magnetised or magnetic field or something. That's what she did. But there were anomalies on the boot. And this person who'd written this, I think it was a chap called Carl Grove, I think, has written an article about this. He pointed out, well, why did they get told to put a compass? It's kind of, somebody's got to have known something about that.
To push it along,
yeah, because otherwise it's just like a bit random, isn't it? And I hadn't thought of that, because the case was reported to the Air Force soon after it happened, their local Air Force base. But anyway, the Hills, they didn't really want any publicity for their case. So anybody that thinks they just wrote for publicity, that's not true. They actually described their case to a local church group. I think they decided that a small church group, and they decided to discuss their experience because they thought it was significant in terms of, I think they might have felt that it was some type of demonic influence or something cracking off like that. They weren't really sure what happened. And then apparently, I think there was somebody from the local paper was at the church group or knew somebody that went to the church meeting, and he went to see them. I think they spoke to the newspaper guy, and I think they said, we'll speak to you, but don't publish it, we don't want this published. But he did publish it, and then all these rumours started getting out about these false stories, and then they thought, right, that's it, we'll have to write a book now. And they wrote the book. They got somebody to help them write the book. I should remember the guy's name. And then they wrote the book, which is called Interrupted Journey. They went for hypnotic regression. So as far as I'm aware, it was the first case where hypnotic regression was used as a tool to get more information. And the hypnotist, he was good. He was pretty objective. Again, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
That wasn't Bud Hopkins, was it?
No, it was before his time. Yeah, I think the Interrupted Journey book may have inspired Hopkins to write his book. Let's see. John G. Fuller wrote the book, Interrupted Journey. That you can get PDFs free online. I think it's in the Internet Archive. And the Hills, they were coming back from Toronto. I think they'd been on vacation. And then they saw this object in the sky. It was following them for about an hour. Then they heard this beeping sound, and then they stopped the car. Barney got out. He saw the craft. I think the craft had landed at this point, and they were watching it. He was watching it through binoculars, and he saw these beings in the window. And then they eventually ended up getting taken onto the craft. And as I say, they had medical procedures done on them. Barney had mud on his shoes when he got home, and he hadn't walked through a field or anything in between starting the journey and getting in the car, so he didn't know where this mud had come from. He had no memory of that.
Betty's dress was covered in some sort of residual...
Yeah, Betty's dress had some type of stain on it, and she kept that and had that analysed. It was never determined, I don't think, properly what that material was. But anyway, so after the Betty and Barney Hill case, it was the same type of abductions started to occur. So there's a couple of things that came out of that, and the Betty and Barney Hill case, or at least some years after this, this is where the Zeta Reticulum story came from. Because what happened was, and I think Stanton Friedman wrote this up originally, there was a school teacher called Marjorie Frisch who was an amateur astronomer, and she read the Interrupted Journey book, probably a couple of years after it's published, and she was intrigued because Betty had described the aliens on the ship. She asked the alien, "Where do you come from?" And the alien said, "Well,
give it a star map."
Yeah. The alien said, "Well, if I told you where it was, would you know?" And she said, "Well, no, but you can't show me a map." And allegedly, the alien showed her a star map. And as you say, and Betty drew out this star map. She drew a sketch. And then Marjorie Fish took that sketch, and she saw these, three bright stars in it, and about 10 or 12 other stars at least. I've got this sketch in the book. It's on the internet as well. Most of the content in the book is just about 100% of it's just a collection of stuff that's on the web anyway, and nothing I've got that's unique to my
She
book.
builds a 3D star map, doesn't she?
So Marjorie Fish, I think she spent years, it took 2 years or something, getting rods and sticks and putting these stars into a 3D. There's no computer graphics of that type then, of course, and she used a star catalogue. Let's see. Yeah, she based stellar distances on the Gliese star catalogue, which was made in 1969. So the star map was done after that she did. Yeah, the thing is that she came out with the conclusion that, based on the sketch, the only vantage point that made sense was if it was Zeta Reticulum. So in other words, she argued that Betty and Barney Hill's captors came from Zeta Reticulum. But I read further into this, and that star catalogue that was used has now been updated, because that 1969 star catalogue, which was the data that Marjorie Fish used for Betty Hill's star map, had been improved upon, and it was made, I think, primarily from ground-based observations. But in the 80s, I think it was in the 86, 87 sort of time frame, a satellite went up called Hipparcos, an ESA satellite, and that was for measuring the positions of stars. So they basically made a much more accurate star catalogue. And again, people that have revisited the star map since then have said, articles that I've read say that the revised star map, it was much less clear that the Betty Hill sketch could be argued to show Zeta Reticulum. That was became a much weaker argument. And I have to wonder how accurately she could recall. I mean, to me, you'd need a photographic memory to recall an accurate star map, to me. And I don't think Betty Hill ever claimed to have a photographic memory. So, yeah, we talked about the Betty and Barney Hill case, haven't we? And then we basically, that was to me a change in the that was more darker abductions, darker abductions where aliens were coming in, and apparent aliens anyway, according to what the witnesses said, and doing things without permission. That was, I think, was a key thing.
Yeah.
Things were being done without permission, and they weren't very nice things. There was, and then you get into the sort of Whitley Strieber and Communion book, and he later came out outright and said that he was raped, by these aliens. He said that later. I didn't say that in the Communion book. I know I heard him say that in one of the later interviews. And I think he's mentioned in the other books that I mentioned in my book, as the Carla Turner books. She wrote 3 books. I think I've read all of them now. Masquerade of Angels, which is about a psychic called Ted Rice, I think was his name. He was quite a well-known psychic in the US, apparently. I'd not heard of him before. I think in the 70s he became quite well-known. And he had certain alien abduction experiences, and it's a very well-written book, that Masquerade of Angels. And he spent a long time trying to work out what this alien interaction meant. He couldn't really work out whether these were positive or negative, but the overall conclusion that he came to for his experiences was it was rather negative, because they were quite deceptive and they told him things which turned out not to be true, and this sort of thing. And that's in Masquerade of Angels, and it's quite an enjoyable read. It's a little bit like a novel, even though it's a true story. I think parts of it might have been kind of slightly dramatised, but it is a true story. And the other book, I think it was, I can't remember which one it's in, I think it's in the Taken book, which I think is Carla Turner's second book, or no, Taken is their third book. First one was Into the Fringe. And I quote some passages from that in the Acknowledged book. What interested me was that she actually stumbled in on, I think it was one of her family members or one of her friends, while they were having an abduction experience. And in the room there was this blue light around the bed. And she basically came to the conclusion from talking to witnesses and that technology was being used to create this abduction experience in this particular case. She called it a VRS, virtual reality system, or might have been a virtual reality simulation. And her books were written in the early 90s, I think.
So there was a blue circle, but the girl was still in the bed.
Still in the bed, and it was like there was a blue light. I can't remember if she said it was like a sphere or a glow. I can't remember the exact way that she characterises it. See if I can read a short quote, because it's not very long. But and so at that point, at first she did sort of go the whole alien abduction thing, but then she sort of came to the conclusion ultimately that there was a big military involvement. That she was part of one type is an artificially induced virtual reality scenario, VRS, an externally introduced event that to the witness is practically indistinguishable from objective reality. The person may experience a situation with full sensory input and react with genuine physical and emotional responses, although in reality the person may be lying immobile on an exam table or sitting attached to some alien apparatus, or even asleep in bed with no outward sign of disturbance. And that's apparently what she stumbled in on. And I think that's reading from her book. That's what a quote from her book from Taken, 1994 book. So, and actually Carla Turner, she wrote these 3 books, as I say. She got to know quite a lot of people in the scene, people like Barbara Bartolic, and she became convinced that there was a big military involvement, on many levels of that. And eventually she was diagnosed with cancer, and I think she died in 1999 or year 2000, not too long after she brought all this information out. She became very mistrustful that, it was the simplistic thing was it was aliens coming here and doing things. So she didn't say that wasn't what was happening, but she became quite suspicious that there were other things going on as well involving the military. And I have to ask that question as well. And there's another account which I go into in the book, which kind of seems to develop from that a little bit, perhaps, or maybe. And it's this account involving Linda Napolitano in New York City, and she was abducted at 3 o'clock in the morning, I think in 1989, from her apartment in the middle of Manhattan. And
so where they saw her going out the window?
That's right. And people saw her floating out the window, and a craft was there and lit up the side of a building and a beam. But the really weird bit about that, it allegedly involves Perez de Cuellar, who was the Secretary General of the UN. He was actually in New York apparently when this happened for some delegation at the UN or something. And it was alleged that he was actually in the craft or something. And Napolitano's son was also abducted in this alleged encounter, and it was the son that identified de Cuellar when he was showing pictures, according to Bud Hopkins. And Bud Hopkins wrote this up in his book called Witness, but he didn't name de Cuellar. I think he just said some UN dignitary or something.
They'd been taken out of the car in the limousine while it was moving down the street, weren't they?
Something like that, yeah.
And there was 2 or 3 of them taken, weren't there?
Yeah, there was two bodyguards apparently that were de Cuellar that either saw him get taken or something. Yeah. I forget the exact details. But apparently de Cuellar, I haven't seen copies of these letters, but he was asked about this and he didn't deny that it happened, according to what was.
Yeah, because wasn't it somewhere along the lines of the aliens had showed themselves to him? Wasn't he part of the UN? Wasn't the UN?
He was. Yeah, he was the UN Secretary General.
That's right, Perez de Cuellar.
Yeah, Perez de Cuellar.
And the idea was that we're here, we're presenting ourselves here, we come in peace, sort of thing.
But I don't know if it went along with that, but I mean, Stephen Greer tells the story a little bit different, because he's the one that I think had come out with the story that it was de Cuellar that was involved.
That's right, yeah.
And Greer describes this meeting with Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, which happened in 1994, and I think that event came up.
Yeah.
And Greer claimed that was a simulation done by the military, and that Greer claimed to know the person that had helped design the electronics for creating that simulation. That's what I think. Greer says something along those lines in his own book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. I quote that in my book as well. But what I wondered was, and this may, as I've said on the thing with Richard, I mean, putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5, because there were stories, of course, as you may have heard these stories yourselves, that Eisenhower met with aliens in the 50s, in 1954, and we've got this alleged account of him going to Holloman Air Force Base, and then what happened was he went missing from, you know, his appointment book or something, and it was claimed he went to a dentist to have some dental work done. But then people who checked into the records couldn't find any evidence that he actually went to the dentist. I don't think they couldn't find evidence that he went to Holloman, but they point out that I think in the day before that event, which I think was in 54, or the day afterwards, they found in the Eisenhower archives a letter to a church minister, because Eisenhower had gone to this church and for a Sunday service, and his administration sent a letter to the church minister saying, oh yes, thank you for running the service and letting me sit in with the congregation, blah blah. And that was a matter of courtesy that the president's, you know, administration would always do that. They'd always send letters to thank people for hosting them and stuff. And it would normally be the case that when you got done in emergency dental work, they would have sent a letter to the dentist to thank him for, you know, dealing with the matter and all of that. And such a letter didn't exist in the archives. So it was an absence of evidence rather than sort of evidence of absence, so to speak. And there were other, but there were witnesses to this alleged meeting at Holloman. And I think there are a couple of different events, and I always get them confused, but I've got it straightened out in the book. For example, there was a guy who was up a telegraph pole. He said that he saw a flying saucer come over the base, and the base had been kind of like on a sort of semi-lockdown. Nobody could leave the base because an important visitor was coming. And then he was able to corroborate this with 2 other stories, basically of the same event, from different witnesses or people that knew other witnesses. And this was Art Campbell that did this research, and he's got, I think he wrote, either did a DVD about it or a book, which I link in the book, in my book. So I came to the conclusion that that maybe this Eisenhower meeting did happen, and that there was this agreement between Eisenhower and the aliens, and you know, Bill Cooper talked about this in '89, maybe before that even.
Later in 1954, they landed again at Edwards Air Force Base. President Eisenhower had arranged to be on vacation in Palm Springs. At the appointed date and time, President Eisenhower was whisked away. He actually disappeared. Nobody even saw the helicopter come or go, but he just flat disappeared. The press was really shook up, and if you read the newspapers during that period of time, you will find that the press literally went wild trying to locate him. They were given a story that he was taken to a dentist for a toothache. They never found a dentist that treated President Eisenhower. In fact, he was at Edwards Air Force Base. He reached a formal agreement with the aliens and a treaty was signed.
And he said that these agreements had been made and that the aliens were offering technology, and that, you know, the agreement was 2 key things: that they would be allowed to abduct human beings and do things to them, whatever that might be. And the other key thing is that the Eisenhower, you know, and everybody in the military, they would help keep the aliens' presence a secret. Yeah. That was part of the agreement. Now again, you know, I don't know if that really happened. Is it just some disinformation? But if you take all the abduction cases, and there are many, and listen to them, just take their accounts as being what they are, and they're not making stuff up, they're not trying to make money, they're not, you know, having a bad trip, they're not on drugs, blah blah blah. If you just take the accounts and take the sort of general atmosphere that they portray, and then look at, you know, the general thing of the, as we've already mentioned, the Adamski Space Brothers thing, and look at the time scale, 61, it fits, you know, it kind of fits that something happened in the 50s, and you know, even it was said in the after the Roswell case, that it was told to Secretary Forrestal, allegedly, who was the Defence Secretary. He apparently, according to what's shown in the Roswell TV movie, I can't remember which account that comes from, but Secretary Forrestal was telepathically told in 1947 or just after that more alien races would be coming after the Roswell event. And again, if you look at all the accounts, the witnesses, you look at the different types of craft, the different types of event, that seems to me to be what has happened, you know.
Well, the Eisenhower meeting seems to be for a lot from the UFO point of view, is a cornerstone now, isn't it, of our belief?
Well, I mean, I don't know about that. I think, I don't know if people...
For me it is. I've always thought, I don't believe that every alien's positive.
Yeah.
Do I believe that the industrial complex have hijacked this thing? Yeah, of course they have. All of a 9/11, the direct energy weapon, the confidence they had to do that 20 years ago. The technology they have is way in advance of anything we've got, that we can even imagine at this moment. And it's all, but they got it from somewhere, haven't they?
Yeah.
So if we know our government couldn't give two toots about us, you know, it's obvious. So selling us as there you go, human life for technology, it's a no-brainer, you know.
But also, you also don't know. I mean, again, you know, looking at this in sort of more literal sense, is if this alien race really did come along and said, "Look, we've got this technology, so you can get something out of it. We're going to do what we want." You know, there could be that element to it. If they've already got that superior technology, and you know, they may have tried to act, the military-industrial complex, allegedly in our best interest, to say, well, look, okay, we'll go along with it for now. We'll set up our own intelligence network, which is, you know, against the aliens, and see what we can do to set up our own, you know, projects to fight back against them. You know, again, did they do that? Maybe they did. You know, maybe they just were happy to go along with the aliens and manipulate us and exploit us, you know, as they appear to have done. You know.
So I can't remember where I heard it, but I remember something along the lines of, which was a real different take on it, was Roswell was by design. They crash landed and knew they were taken to the inner sanctums of the US secret facilities. Instead of landing on the White House lawn and saying we come in peace, show us everything you've got, we give the bodies, they take us there anyway. It's like a Trojan horse, isn't it?
Could be. You just don't know.
It makes a lot of, because we're scratching around trying to make sense of stuff that we don't see all the. We've got 5 pieces of the jigsaw, and we're trying to make up. We're trying to recreate the rest of it through our imagination, aren't we?
Well, I mean, by educated guesses, perhaps I'd say, rather than imagination. But you know, you're right. We only have a few morsels of the information. But I think, nevertheless, if you do try and build up a picture, you know, like with everything else, you're going to stand a better chance of having a good guess rather than just, you know, you know.
But then, for as many people in the UFO community who've been abducted, they'll say, I wasn't abducted. You know, I've been chosen firstly. Rob Hulton's a firm believer that it's been a purely positive experience in his life, and it's a hereditary thing.
And that's it. I think, you know, if just because let's say for the sake of argument, we've got these grey aliens for the sake of argument, Zeta Reticulum, although I don't think that's been established with any certainty at all. Again, I'm going to that a bit in the book as to why that should be questioned. But it doesn't mean to say that there aren't these enlightened other beings from Sirius or the Pleiades. It was totally different. Nothing to do with any Zeta Reticulans or anybody. They've never talked to the US government. They've never talked to the British government. They have their own technology, their own ships, you know, their own reality-bending facilities, and they've chosen to interact with a certain person or a small group of people. Yeah, that could still be going on as well, couldn't it? We can't say that the one thing rules out the other.
Totally.
So, you know, and it goes back to what we were saying when we'd stopped recording about this idea that consciousness is everywhere and in everything and experiencing everything. So that means that you can't really rule anything out particularly.
That's right.
Not in terms of experiential.
Because for a lot of the positive, the Norse or you know, they're all about raising our vibration up. They're about attuning the earth, aren't they? You know, and bringing everybody up to they're not here to mine, you know, for resources or to have absolute power. It's where you sit on the fence, isn't it? Of either positive, either good, either negative. You know, because I've listened to abduction stories. Tina Bird, who came to Birmingham, the UFO group, and her story is brutal. And at no point does she say it's a positive thing for her. You know, And like I say, Rob Hult's the two that I'm using, and they wouldn't mind me using them.
No.
And he's got nothing but sweetness and light for the. Yeah, at the end of the day, to take a 2-year-old out of his bed, away from his parents. Is that a kind and loving, compassionate thing?
That's it. That's what I asked those very same questions. Yeah. And in the book, I also go into the case of Stan Romanek, which is, you know, again, there's various sorts of bits of crossovers there that you wonder about, because he's got a very kind of convoluted tale. But he's actually filmed what was unusual in his case, as far as I'm aware. I mean, again, I don't know whether Tina or I don't think Robert Hulse has actually filmed graphs, you know, close up and got moving video of them. But Stan Romanek, he got a couple of videos which were put online, and they didn't stay there very long. No. And then again, when I was investigating that case, I came across this character called, and I mentioned him in the book, called Neil Slade. And it's like he got involved with the Romanek case, and he made some web pages about it. And I remember I did one of these web captures of where it's called Web Reaper, and you give it a URL and then it'll download all the connected pages. It'll download a whole website basically.
Oh, right, okay.
And then just save it on your hard drive. And I did that years ago, and then I copied all those files onto my website because I set up like a disclosure section. In fact, I originally put it on a CD. That's what I was doing back in the early 2000s, when not only broadband internet was just coming in. Like 2003, I got broadband internet here, just in Derby area, and it was still fairly slow broadband. It was only about twice as fast as dial-up, even though it was always on. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll download all these pages and then I can save them onto a CD and I can give that somebody for 50p, and they've got that whole. And one of the sites I downloaded was Neil Slade's website with all the Stan Romanek stuff. And then at some point, years later, I've stuck that back online on my website when I got my own. And I just thought, here's this disclosure archive, and what was on this CD, and I put a menu on it and clickable links and all this for all the different sections. That went on my website. And then I got this email, this must be a couple of years later, from Neil Slade saying, oh, you've got my Stan Romanek content on your website. And I said, oh yeah, I haven't, sorry about that. And he asked me to take it off, which I did, you know. But then this same guy, I learned that he was involved in this brain research project in Oregon or something. I mentioned that in the book. With some guy who was doing like this brain research and brain function research, and he was involved with that, this Neil Slade guy. But the peculiar thing was that I'd found him involved with the 9/11 Scholars Group as well. And that wasn't a very big group. It was only less than a couple of hundred people when I was involved. And he was a thermite sniffer. He was into the thermite stuff. So I was thinking, what are the chances? What are the chances of that? I mentioned that in the book, not a very. So I'm thinking, why is his brain research? He's sniffing around Stan Romanek. He's not happy about me reposting it. And you look at the website, and it wasn't a fancy website, and it's like he didn't really seem to have any particular claim to it. It wasn't something that he seemed to have invested a lot of time in gathering. I don't know. Maybe he did. I don't know. But anyway, he didn't really seem to share the same goals as I did anyway with it. But anyway, so Stan Romanek, he then about 2-3 years ago, he gets charged for having
child porn.
You heard that? Yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? That's a destroyer.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I'd followed his case for a long time.
Oh, okay, good, right.
So I was where the alien pops up at the kitchen window, and you're thinking,
what did you make of that?
Well, it's grainy, and you have to leap of faith. You're thinking, But there's a whole program on him, a movie. I think I watched it on Amazon a few years back.
Yeah.
And it's quite compelling, really compelling.
It is.
He got beat up by the guys that pulled up in the big van, and then 3 or 4, I don't know, special forces who would have beat him up, broke his nose, I think it was. So at that point you have to go, okay, probability, I believe him.
Yeah.
But like with anything, they just destroy you. So they find child porn or whatever they found on his thing, and it destroyed his all credibility and his career and everything he had, didn't it?